Neighbors laughed when the widow built a shed all around her cabin, until her firewood stayed dry. The first time the hammer rang out across the hollow, people paused on their porches to listen. It was an odd sound for early spring, steady, stubborn, and coming from the little cabin at the edge of the trees where Eleanor Whitmore lived alone. Eleanor was a widow of 3 winters now. Her husband, Thomas, had died quietly in his sleep the same week the pipes froze and split. Since then, she'd learned to do things herself, patching leaks, chopping wood, carrying groceries up the gravel road. Still, no one expected this. By the end of the week, it became clear what she was doing. Eleanor was building a wooden shed that wrapped entirely around her cabin, like a second skin. Planks rose along every wall, leaving narrow covered walkways between the shed and the house. From the road, it looked strange. Wasteful. Even foolish. At the diner, men shook their heads into their coffee. Built herself a barn around a house, one laughed. Could have just bought a tarp, another said. She's lonely, someone added softly, though it still sounded like judgment. Eleanor heard the laughter sometimes. Sound carries in the hills. But she didn't answer it. She just kept building. She worked slowly, because she had to. Her hands weren't young, and her back complained loudly, but she had learned something grief teaches well. If you stop every time something hurts, nothing ever gets finished. Thomas used to tease her about firewood. You stack it prettier than you use it, he'd say, watching her line the logs just right. After he died, the wood had become her quiet enemy. One bad rain, one early snow, and half her supply would be soaked. Wetwood meant smoke, cold nights, and fear, the kind that crawled into your bones when winter felt bigger than you. The shed wasn't for looks. It was for survival. She stacked her firewood along the inner walls of the shed, row by careful row, protected from rain and snow. Each log she placed felt like a small promise to herself, you will make it through another winter. But the neighbors didn't see that. They only saw a widow doing something odd. Then came October. The first cold snap hit early, sharp and unkind. Frost glittered on the ground before dawn, and the hills filled with the sound of axes and chainsaws as everyone hurried to prepare. A storm followed, 3 days of relentless rain that turned roads to mud and soaked everything it touched. When it finally passed, people stepped outside to assess the damage. Tarps had torn. Wood piles had collapsed. Logs lay dark and heavy with water. That's when someone noticed Eleanor's place. Her firewood sat dry. Clean. Ready. The shed had done exactly what she built it to do. The laughter stopped, replaced by something quieter. Curiosity. Respect. And, for some, shame. The real test came in January. A blizzard rolled in overnight, faster than the forecast predicted. Snow buried cars, blocked roads, and knocked out power across the county. The temperature dropped to dangerous levels, and the wind screamed like it wanted inside every home. Eleanor woke before dawn to a silence so deep it felt wrong. No hum of electricity. No ticking clock. She lit her stove with dry wood and wrapped herself in layers, listening to the storm batter the shed walls. The fire caught easily, strong and steady. She was warm. Around noon, she heard a knock, soft, uncertain. At the shed door stood Mark Jensen, the same man who'd laughed loudest at the diner. His face was red from the cold, his breath visible in the air. My wood's soaked, he admitted, eyes down. Stove won't stay lit. My kids. He didn't finish the sentence. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She led him inside the shed and handed him an armload of dry logs. Take what you need, she said. Word traveled fast. By evening, more neighbors came. Some embarrassed. Some desperate. One elderly couple whose furnace had failed. A young mother whose pipes had frozen. Eleanor gave wood to all of them. By the third day, people stopped coming just to take. They came to help. Someone shoveled snow from her path. Someone else fixed a loose board on the shed roof. A woman brought soup. Another brought bread. That night, as the storm finally loosened its grip, the neighbors gathered inside the shed, sharing warmth, food, and stories by lantern light. The space that once inspired laughter now held something rare: community. Mark cleared his throat, voice thick. "We laughed at you," he said. "But you weren't building for attention. You were building for the future. For yourself. And, for us." Eleanor looked around at the faces glowing in the soft light. Faces that had once turned away. "I didn't build it for anyone else," she said honestly. "But I'm glad it's here." Spring came slowly that year. When the snow melted, people noticed something else. Eleanor wasn't alone anymore. Neighbors stopped by just to check in. Kids waved when they passed. Someone helped her replant the garden Thomas once loved. The shed stayed. Not as a joke. Not as a mistake. But as a reminder. Sometimes the things people laugh at are the very things that will save them later. Sometimes quiet preparation is an act of courage. And sometimes, the strongest walls we build aren't to keep others out, but to hold enough warmth to share when it matters most. Eleanor stacked her firewood again that fall, hands steady, heart lighter. And this time, no one laughed.